The gunshot echoed across the plains, splitting the Montana dusk like thunder. Penelope Hayes crouched behind the overturned wagon, her heart hammering against her ribs as she reloaded her father's old Colt revolver with trembling fingers. 3 men dead, 2 bullets left, and miles of unforgiving territory between her and anywhere that might pass for civilization in 1876. "This ain't personal, Miss Hayes," called a gruff voice from the rocks. "Just business. Your daddy's debt's gotta be paid one way or another." Penelope bit back a bitter laugh. Not personal. They'd murdered her father 3 days ago, burned their small ranch to the ground, and had been hunting her across the territory ever since. If that wasn't personal, she didn't know what was. The sun dipped lower, painting the landscape blood red. She needed to move before darkness fell completely. The bounty hunters knew these lands better than she did. Her only advantage was that they wanted her alive to collect their payment from Willard Preston, the banker who claimed her father had borrowed money he couldn't repay. A pebble skittered behind her. Penelope whirled around, revolver raised, only to find herself staring into the steadiest pair of blue eyes she'd ever seen. "I suggest you don't pull that trigger, madam," said the stranger, his voice low and calm despite having a gun aimed at his face. He wore dusty trail clothes, a worn leather vest, and a hat pulled low over sun-weathered features. "Seemed to me you might need those last 2 bullets for the men over yonder." "Who the hell are you?" Penelope hissed, not lowering her weapon. "Owen Rhodes," he replied simply. "And I reckon you've got yourself in quite a situation." "I don't need your help," she snapped, even as another bullet splintered wood inches from her head. "Never said you did." He glanced toward the rocks where the bounty hunters were positioned. "But I count 3 men with rifles, and you've got 2 bullets in that revolver. Mathematics ain't in your favor." Before Penelope could respond, Owen moved with startling speed. He pulled her down as bullets whistled overhead, then drew his own pistol and fired 3 rapid shots toward the bounty hunters. Someone yelped in pain. "We need to move," he said, scanning the terrain. "My horse is tethered behind that ridge. Can you run? Why are you helping me?" Penelope demanded, suspicion narrowing her eyes. Owen's expression remained neutral. "Maybe I don't like seeing 3 armed men hunting a woman. Questions can wait." He nodded toward the gathering darkness. "Right now, we need to disappear." The next moments blurred into a chaotic rush of gunfire and pounding feet. Somehow they reached Owen's horse, a magnificent chestnut stallion that seemed to understand the urgency without command. Owen helped Penelope up, then swung into the saddle behind her. "Hold tight," he murmured, and then they were galloping into the twilight, the sounds of pursuit gradually fading behind them. They rode hard for what felt like hours, the rhythm of the horses' hooves matching Penelope's racing pulse. The vast Montana wilderness swallowed them, stars emerging overhead like silver pinpricks in black velvet. Owen guided the horse with confidence, taking routes that seemed invisible to Penelope's untrained eye. Eventually, they reached a small creek where Owen finally slowed their pace. He dismounted smoothly and offered Penelope his hand. She ignored it, sliding down awkwardly on her own. "We'll rest here briefly," he said, leading the horse to water. "They won't find our trail in the dark." Penelope leaned against a tree, exhaustion suddenly making her limbs leaden. "You still haven't told me why you're helping me." Owen removed his hat, revealing dark hair streaked with premature silver at the temples. In the moonlight, his face showed the lines of a man who'd lived hard but not unkindly. "I was passing through when I heard gunfire," he said. "Saw a woman outnumbered and outgunned," he shrugged. "Not much more to it than that. So you're what, some kind of gentleman outlaw?" Her tone made it clear she didn't believe in such things. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "No, madam, just a rancher heading back from Helena." "Those men are bounty hunters," Penelope said after a moment. "They think I'm worth something to Willard Preston." "The banker from Silverdale," she nodded, surprised. "You know him." "Of him," Owen corrected. "His reputation extends beyond Silverdale's borders." He offered her his canteen. "Why's Preston after you?" Penelope took a careful sip before answering. My father borrowed money for our ranch. When he couldn't pay, Preston sent men to collect. They killed him. Her voice remained steady through sheer force of will. Now Preston's claiming I'm collateral for the debt. Owen's expression darkened. That's not how the law works. Law, Penelope laughed bitterly. The sheriff in Silverdale is Preston's cousin. There's no law that applies to men like Preston in territories like this. Owen was quiet for a long moment, studying her with those unnervingly perceptive eyes. Where were you heading? Colorado, she answered. My aunt lives in Denver. I thought I could start over there. He nodded thoughtfully. Denver's a long way. You'd never make it alone with those men on your trail. I don't recall asking for your assessment, Penelope snapped, fatigue making her words sharper than intended. Owen didn't seem offended. My ranch is about a day's ride north of here. You'd be safe there while we figure out how to deal with Preston. Penelope shook her head firmly. There is no we, Mr. Rhodes. I appreciate your help tonight, but I'll be continuing on my own come morning. That would be unwise. Nevertheless, it's my decision. She crossed her arms, daring him to argue. Instead, Owen simply nodded. As you wish, but the offer stands. He turned his attention to securing their small camp for the night. You should rest. I'll keep watch. Despite her distrust, exhaustion soon overcame Penelope. She drifted off to sleep with her back against a tree trunk, her father's revolver still clutched in her hand. As the mysterious cowboy kept silent vigil nearby, morning came with the harsh clarity that only dawn in the mountains can bring. Penelope woke with a start, momentarily disoriented. Owen was already awake, brewing coffee over a small, nearly smokeless fire. You didn't run off, she observed, stretching stiff limbs. Promise to help, he replied, handing her a tin cup of steaming coffee. Not in the habit of breaking promises. Penelope accepted the coffee gratefully. The warmth seeped into her hands, a small comfort in a world that had offered few lately. Those men will still be searching, Owen said after they'd eaten a sparse breakfast of jerky and hardtack. Preston won't give up easily if he thinks you're valuable. I'm not going to your ranch, Penelope stated firmly. Owen studied her for a moment. Then I'll escort you to Colorado. Penelope nearly choked on her coffee. What? Why would you do that? Same reason I helped yesterday, he replied simply. It's the right thing to do. You don't even know me. Know enough. He began saddling his horse with efficient movements. No, Preston's the type of man who thinks he owns people. No, those bounty hunters won't stop. And no, you've got courage, but courage alone won't get you to Denver. Penelope wanted to argue but found herself without good reasons. The truth was, she needed help. Her provisions were gone, her horse lost during yesterday's ambush, and the bounty hunters were still out there. I can't pay you, she finally said. Owen finished securing the saddle before turning to face her. Not asking for payment. Everyone wants something, Mr. Rhodes. A fleeting shadow crossed his face. Not always, Miss Hayes. He offered his hand to help her mount. Do we have an agreement? Penelope hesitated, then nodded once. To Denver, then we part ways. Fair enough. They traveled cautiously that day, keeping to forested areas when possible, avoiding open plains where they might be spotted easily. Owen proved to be an expert tracker, occasionally stopping to check for signs of pursuit. By midday, Penelope's initial suspicion had given way to grudging respect for his woodcraft and horsemanship. How did you learn to track like that? She asked during a brief rest. Spent some time with the crow, Owen replied, scanning the horizon. After the war, you fought. He nodded, a familiar distance entering his eyes that Penelope had seen in other veterans. Union cavalry, too many years ago now. She wanted to ask more but sensed his reluctance. Instead, she said, my father fought too, never talked about it much. Owen's expression softened slightly. Wise man. They continued their journey through the afternoon, the stunning landscape of Montana territory stretching endlessly around them. Despite the circumstances, Penelope found herself appreciating the wild beauty, the sweeping grasslands, distant mountains, and vast sky that seemed to go on forever. As dusk approached, Owen guided them to a sheltered ravine where a small stream provided fresh water. "We'll camp here," he decided. Good visibility, hard to approach unseen. Penelope dismounted, wincing at the soreness in her legs and back. She wasn't accustomed to such long rides, though she'd never admit it to her taciturn companion. While Owen tended to his horse, Penelope gathered wood for a fire. The routine of camp-making provided a strange comfort, a semblance of normality in days that had been anything but normal. "You're good with that horse," she observed later as they sat near the small fire. "He responds to you like you share thoughts." Owen glanced at the chestnut stallion grazing nearby. "Merlin and I have been together 8 years, saved each other's lives more than once." "Merlin?" Penelope raised an eyebrow. Like the wizard, the corner of Owen's mouth lifted in what might have been a smile. "Found him during a thunderstorm, appeared like magic when I needed him most." This glimpse of sentimentality surprised Penelope. It didn't fit with her initial impression of the stoic cowboy. "What about you?" Owen asked. "Your father was a rancher," Penelope nodded. "Small spread outside Silverdale, nothing fancy, but it was ours." She poked at the fire with a stick. "Or so we thought until Preston claimed otherwise." What happened exactly? She was quiet for a long moment, memories washing over her. Drought hit last year, cattle prices dropped. Father took a loan from Preston to get through winter. Her jaw tightened. Come spring, Preston changed the terms, said interest had accumulated, demanded immediate payment or the ranch. And when your father couldn't pay, Preston sent men, there was a fight. Penelope's voice remained steady, though her knuckles whitened around the stick. "My father died defending our home. I escaped, but barely. They burned everything." Owen's face had hardened during her story, and the local law did nothing. Sheriff Pearson took statements. Said it was unfortunate but legal, debt collection, he called it. Bitterness laced her words. Then Preston put out word that I was part of the collateral, that my father had pledged me as guarantee. "That's not possible under any law," Owen said, anger evident in his tone. "Maybe not in civilized places," Penelope replied. "But out here, Preston's word is law enough for most." They sat in silence as darkness settled fully around them. The fire crackled, sending sparks drifting upward to join the stars. "We should reach the Wyoming Territory border in 2 days," Owen finally said. "Once we're beyond Montana, Preston's reach diminishes." "You sound familiar with him," Penelope observed. Owen's expression turned distant. "Men like Preston exist everywhere. They take what isn't theirs because they can. Because money buys the right kind of silence." There was personal knowledge in his words, Penelope realized, experience that went beyond general observation. "What's your story, Mr. Rhodes?" she asked quietly. "You know mine now." Owen stared into the fire for so long she thought he might not answer. "Had a ranch near Helena," he finally said. "Smaller than what I have now, wife named Sarah, son who'd just learned to walk." He paused, the muscles in his jaw working. "Railroad wanted the land I refused to sell." Penelope felt cold despite the fire's warmth. "What happened?" "Fire." The word fell between them like a stone. "Started in the barn while I was in town. Sarah tried to save the horses." He stopped, eyes fixed on some point beyond the flames. "By the time I returned, it was too late." "I'm sorry," Penelope whispered, the words wholly inadequate. Owen nodded once, acknowledging her sympathy without looking up. "That was 6 years ago. Took me 3 years to prove the railroad was responsible, not that it mattered in the end. Did they pay, the men who did it?" "One did." Something dangerous flickered in his eyes. "The others had protection, money, connections." Penelope understood then. Owen Rhodes wasn't helping her out of simple kindness. He was helping because he saw in Preston the same corrupt power that had destroyed his own life. "That's why you're helping me," she said softly. "You're fighting old ghosts." His gaze finally met hers across the fire. "Maybe, or maybe I just don't like seeing the same story play out again when I can do something about it." A howl echoed in the distance, a wolf calling to its pack. The sound carried across the wilderness, lonely and determined. We should sleep, Owen said, rising to his feet. Long ride tomorrow. I'll take first watch, Penelope offered. He hesitated, then nodded. Wake me in 4 hours. As Owen settled into his bedroll, Penelope remained by the fire, her father's revolver across her lap. The night stretched vast and mysterious around their small camp. For the first time since her father's death, she didn't feel completely alone against the world. It was a dangerous feeling. Penelope had learned the hard way that dependency led to vulnerability. Yet there was something about Owen Rhodes that made her want to trust him, despite her better judgment. She watched the stars wheel slowly overhead, determined to maintain her guard against both external threats and the quiet strength of the man sleeping nearby. The following day brought challenges neither had anticipated. Mid-morning, as they followed a narrow trail through pine-covered hills, Owen suddenly raised his hand for halt. Merlin's ears had pricked forward, a warning sign Owen had learned to trust. "What is it?" Penelope whispered. Owen pointed silently toward a ridge about half a mile ahead. Squinting, Penelope made out riders at least 4 moving parallel to their route. "Bounty hunters?" she asked, her heart quickening. "Can't tell," Owen murmured. Could be regular travelers." "That's not a chance I want to take." Owen nodded, studying the terrain. "We'll cut west through that ravine. Longer route, but safer." The detour cost them precious hours. Worse, dark clouds gathered on the horizon, promising the kind of storm that could turn dry creek beds into raging torrents within minutes. "We need shelter," Owen said as the first distant rumble of thunder reached them. "There's an old trapper's cabin a few miles ahead if I remember right." The wind began to rise, bending the tall grass in waves as they pushed forward. The temperature dropped sharply, and Penelope found herself shivering despite her wool coat. "There," Owen pointed as lightning illuminated the landscape. A small, weather-beaten cabin stood nestled against a hillside, barely visible among the trees. They reached it just as the first heavy raindrops began to fall. The cabin was abandoned but still sound, its roof intact enough to keep out the worst of the storm. Owen quickly stabled Merlin in the small lean-to attached to one side while Penelope assessed their temporary shelter. The interior was Spartan: a rough wooden table, a couple of stools, a stone fireplace, and a narrow bed frame with no mattress. Dust and cobwebs suggested it had been empty for at least a season. "Not exactly the Grand Hotel," Penelope remarked as Owen entered, shaking water from his hat. "It'll do," he replied, already gathering kindling from a pile near the fireplace. "Storm like this could last hours." While Owen built a fire, Penelope rummaged through the cabin's sparse contents, finding a few useful items: a dented pot, some forgotten tea leaves in a tin, and a moth-eaten blanket that could be serviceable once shaken out. The fire caught quickly, bringing welcome warmth to the chilly space. Outside, the storm intensified, rain lashing against the small windows and wind howling through the trees. "Quite a tempest," Penelope observed, settling on one of the stools with the blanket around her shoulders. Owen nodded, arranging their saddlebags to dry near the fire. "Good thing in a way. Washes away our tracks." They shared a simple meal of the last of their provisions: jerky, hard biscuits, and tea brewed from the found leaves. The wind continued to rage outside, occasional flashes of lightning illuminating the cabin in stark white bursts. "Never seen a storm quite like this," Penelope said, trying to mask her unease as the cabin creaked around them. "Montana storms can turn mean quick," Owen replied. He glanced at her, noting her tense posture. "Cabins stood through worse, I'd wager." As if to challenge his words, a particularly violent gust rattled the door in its frame. Penelope jumped slightly, then felt foolish for her reaction. "Not fond of storms?" Owen asked, his tone lacking any judgment. Penelope hesitated, then admitted, "Never have been. My mother died during a blizzard when I was 8. Father and I were stranded in town, couldn't get back to the ranch in time." Owen's expression softened. "I'm sorry," she shrugged, aiming for nonchalance. "Long time ago now." A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the crackling fire and the storm's fury. Penelope found herself studying Owen as he methodically cleaned his revolver, his hands steady and sure, his expression focused. There was a certainty to his movements that spoke of a man who knew exactly who he was and what he was capable of. "You said you have a ranch now," she said eventually. "North of here." Owen nodded without looking up from his task. "Nothing grand, 100 head of cattle. Good grazing land, though." "You run it alone." "Have a few hands, good men." He reassembled the revolver with practiced ease. "Peaceful, mostly." Penelope tried to imagine it a quiet life far from towns and the men like Preston who controlled them. It sounded appealing in a way she hadn't expected. "What will you do in Denver?" Owen asked, catching her off guard. Penelope hesitated. She'd been so focused on escape that she'd given little thought to what came after. "My aunt runs a dressmaking shop. I can sew well enough. I suppose I'll work for her until I figure out something else." Owen studied her for a moment. "Is that what you want, dressmaking?" The question was simple but struck at something deeper. What did she want? Before her father's death, she'd had dreams, vague notions of maybe teaching someday or even running the ranch herself. Now survival consumed her thoughts. "I don't know what I want anymore," she admitted. "Just to be safe, to not look over my shoulder constantly." Owen nodded as if he understood perfectly. "Safety's worth wanting." The conversation lapsed again as the storm continued its assault. Penelope felt her eyelids growing heavy, the warmth of the fire and the rhythmic sound of rain lulling her towards sleep, despite her intention to remain alert. "Rest," Owen said, noticing her struggle. "I'll keep watch." "You've barely slept yourself," she protested. "Used to it." He gestured toward the bed frame. "It's not much, but better than the floor." Too exhausted to argue, Penelope arranged their bedrolls on the frame to create a makeshift mattress. She lay down facing the fire, watching as Owen added another log to the flames. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For everything." Owen glanced at her, firelight casting half his face in shadow. "Get some sleep, Miss Hayes." Despite the storm and the circumstances, Penelope fell into the deepest sleep she'd had since her father's death. She woke to stillness. The storm had passed, leaving a preternatural quiet in its wake. Pale morning light filtered through the cabin's dirty windows. Owen was gone. Panic fluttered in Penelope's chest before she heard movement outside. She rose quickly, grabbing her revolver before moving to the window. Owen stood near the edge of the clearing, surveying the surroundings. Merlin grazed peacefully nearby. Nothing seemed amiss, yet Owen's posture suggested alertness, caution. Penelope opened the cabin door. "Everything all right?" Owen turned at her voice. "Storms passed." "But we had visitors during the night." Cold dread washed through her. "Bounty hunters?" He nodded toward a spot near the tree line. "3 horses passed by, didn't stop, but they were following our trail before the rain washed it away." "How do you know they didn't see the cabin?" "Don't know for certain," Owen admitted. "But the storm was at its worst then. Visibility would have been poor, and they continued on." He gestured westward. "Away from our actual route." Penelope absorbed this information, her mind racing. "So we've gained some time, if we're lucky." Owen began walking back toward the cabin. "We should move quickly, though. Head south-southeast. If they realize their mistake, they'll double back." They packed efficiently, leaving the cabin as they'd found it. The world outside was transformed by the storm, washed clean, vibrant with the peculiar clarity that follows heavy rain. Under different circumstances, Penelope might have found it beautiful. "Wyoming borders about 20 miles, Owen said as they mounted. "Once we cross, we'll stop in Sheridan. Resupply, maybe telegraph ahead to your aunt." The thought of reaching relative safety sent a wave of relief through Penelope. Even so, she remained vigilant as they rode, scanning the horizon for any sign of pursuit. The morning passed uneventfully. They made good time across terrain that alternated between rolling hills and open grassland. By noon, Owen estimated they were less than 10 miles from the territorial border. They stopped briefly to rest Merlin near a small stream swollen with rainwater. As Penelope filled their canteens, she noticed Owen studying the distant hills with a frown. "What is it?" she asked, following his gaze. "Dust," he replied, pointing to a faint haze on the horizon. "Riders moving fast." Penelope felt her pulse quicken. "Them, can't be certain." Owen was already moving toward Merlin. "But we shouldn't wait to find out." They mounted quickly, Owen pushing Merlin to a faster pace than they'd maintained previously. The stallion responded willingly, powerful muscles stretching into a ground-eating lope. For nearly an hour they rode hard, the border drawing closer with each passing mile. Penelope began to hope they might outrun their pursuers, until Owen suddenly reined Merlin to a halt. "What?" she began, but fell silent when she saw what lay ahead. A wide creek, normally fordable, had become a churning, muddy river after the storm. What had been a simple crossing was now a serious obstacle. Owen dismounted to assess the situation, his expression grim. "Too deep to cross safely here. Can we find another crossing?" Penelope asked, glancing back toward the dust cloud that had grown more distinct. "Nearest bridge is miles east," Owen replied. "We'd be exposed on open ground too long." He scanned the creek bank, weighing options. "There's a narrower point upstream. Water will be faster, but the distance is shorter." "Is it safe?" Owen's silence was answer enough. "We don't have a choice, do we?" Penelope said. "Always choices," Owen replied, remounting, "just not always good ones." They followed the creek upstream for nearly a mile before reaching the spot Owen had described. Here, the water channel narrowed between rocky banks, the current visibly stronger as it forced its way through the constricted space. Owen studied the crossing carefully. "It's risky, but possible." "Merlin's a strong swimmer." Penelope looked back. The dust cloud was close enough now to make out individual riders, at least 3, moving fast. "We need to try," she said firmly. Owen nodded, guiding Merlin closer to the edge. "Hold tight to me. If we go under, let go of everything except Merlin's mane. He'll get us across." Penelope tightened her arms around Owen's waist as Merlin entered the water. The big horse snorted nervously but moved forward steadily, feeling his way along the rocky bottom. For a few moments, it seemed they might cross without incident. Then, halfway across, Merlin lost his footing on the slippery creek bed. The current caught them, sweeping horse and riders downstream. Penelope gasped as icy water surged around them. Owen shouted something she couldn't hear over the rushing water. Merlin fought valiantly, powerful legs churning as he struggled to regain solid ground. The world became a chaotic blur of water, sky, and desperate movement. Penelope clung to Owen, her fingers cramping with the effort. A submerged branch struck her leg painfully, nearly tearing her from the saddle. Then, suddenly, Merlin found purchase. With a tremendous surge, the stallion lunged forward, pulling them from the main current. A few more frantic moments, and they were dragging themselves onto the opposite bank, waterlogged and gasping. "Are you hurt?" Owen asked, helping Penelope dismount. She shook her head, too breathless to speak. Her leg throbbed where the branch had struck, but it was a minor injury considering what might have happened. Owen quickly checked Merlin, running experienced hands over the horse's legs. "He's all right, tough old boy." He glanced back across the creek. "And our friends have arrived." On the opposite bank, 3 riders had appeared. Even at this distance, Penelope recognized them, the same bounty hunters who had attacked her by the wagon. "Well, well," called the leader, a bearded man with a scar bisecting his left cheek. "Miss Hayes, quite the chase you've led us on." Owen positioned himself slightly in front of Penelope, his hand resting near his holster. "You're outside Preston's territory now," he called back. "Whatever claim you think you have ends at that creek." The bounty hunter laughed. "Debt's a debt anywhere, friend. And Preston pays extra for those who interfere." He nodded to his companions, who began searching for their own crossing point. "We need to move," Owen said quietly to Penelope. "They'll find a way across eventually." They mounted quickly, Merlin still breathing heavily from his ordeal but game as ever. As they rode away from the creek, gunshots rang out, warning shots, too distant to be truly threatening but a clear message nonetheless. Will they follow us into Wyoming? Penelope asked as they pushed deeper into the new territory. Men like that don't much care about borders, Owen replied grimly, but we have a head start now, and Sheridan's not far. They rode steadily through the afternoon, the Wyoming landscape unfolding around them similar to Montana in its vastness, yet somehow different in character. Despite their wet clothes and the lingering threat of pursuit, Penelope felt a spark of hope. They were making progress, putting distance between themselves and Preston's influence. By late afternoon, they spotted Sheridan in the distance, a growing settlement nestled along the railroad line. The sight of buildings, smoke from chimneys, signs of civilization after days in the wilderness brought unexpected emotion welling in Penelope's throat. "We'll need to be careful," Owen cautioned as they approached. "Those men could still be following." "What's the plan?" Penelope asked. "Find a room for the night, get supplies, make arrangements for the next leg of the journey." Owen's expression was thoughtful. "Might be safer to take the train from here, harder for them to follow." The prospect of continuing their journey by rail faster, safer was appealing. Yet Penelope felt a strange reluctance at the thought of concluding their time together. Owen Rhodes had become more than just her protector in these few days. He'd become someone she trusted, perhaps the only person in the world she fully trusted at this moment. They entered Sheridan as dusk was falling, their wet clothes now merely damp, but still uncomfortable. The town was busy despite the approaching evening, cowboys, settlers, and railroad workers filling the streets and saloons. Owen led them to a modest hotel near the center of town. "Wait here with Merlin," he instructed before entering to secure rooms. Penelope stood beside the stallion, acutely aware of how she must appear a woman in men's trousers and a coat too large for her frame, hair wild from days on the trail. She earned curious glances from passers-by but no outright hostility. Owen returned shortly. "Got 2 rooms, stabling for Merlin out back." He helped her dismount. "Hotel has a dining room, we can get a proper meal." The prospect of a real meal, a real bed, clean clothes, luxuries Penelope had taken for granted before her world collapsed suddenly seemed almost overwhelming. Once inside, Owen handed her a key. "Your room's at the end of the hall, I'm next door." He hesitated. "There's a bathhouse attached to the hotel if you want to clean up. I'll see to Merlin and our supplies." Penelope nodded gratefully. "Thank you. I'll meet you downstairs for dinner." "An hour," Owen agreed. The simple pleasure of a hot bath nearly brought tears to Penelope's eyes. She scrubbed away days of trail dust, washed her hair, and even managed to mend the worst tears in her clothing. The bruise on her leg from the creek crossing had blossomed into an impressive purple mark, but it was the least of her concerns. When she descended to the dining room an hour later, she felt almost human again. Owen was already waiting, similarly transformed by clean clothes and a fresh shave. He stood as she approached, and for the first time, Penelope fully appreciated the quiet dignity in his bearing. "You look restored," he observed as they sat. "Amazing what hot water can accomplish," she replied with a small smile. "Were you able to get supplies?" Owen nodded. "Everything we need, and I checked the train schedules. There's one heading south tomorrow afternoon." The practicality of their conversation belied the strange tension Penelope felt between them. Here, in civilization, the intense connection forged during their journey seemed both stronger and more complicated. They ordered a simple but hearty meal: beefsteak, potatoes, fresh bread. As they ate, Owen briefed her on his plans. "I telegraphed ahead to Cheyenne," he said. "Asked about any known associates of Preston's who might be watching the stations." He cut a piece of steak. "Town marshal, there is an old acquaintance. He'll keep an eye out for trouble." "You seem to have connections throughout the territories," Penelope observed. A slight smile touched Owen's lips. "Helps to know people when you're trying to avoid others." "Is that what your life has been, avoiding people?" The question was more personal than she'd intended, but Owen didn't seem offended. "For a time," he admitted. After Sarah and my son died, I wasn't fit for company. He took a sip of coffee. The ranch changed that. Can't run cattle alone, but you keep to yourself otherwise. Owen studied her for a moment. Until recently. The implication hung between them, unaddressed but acknowledged. Penelope looked down at her plate, suddenly unsure of herself. What will you do after Denver? She asked, changing the subject. Return to your ranch, that's the plan. Owen's gaze remained steady on her face. Unless there's reason to consider alternatives. Before Penelope could respond, a commotion at the hotel entrance drew their attention. A man burst into the dining room, scanning the faces of the diners with obvious urgency. Owen tensed, his hand moving instinctively toward his holster. But the newcomer wasn't one of the bounty hunters. He was young, barely out of his teens, wearing the dust of hard riding. Mr. Rhodes, he called. Owen Rhodes, Owen stood slowly. That's me. The young man hurried to their table, holding out a telegram. Urgent message, sir. Station master said you'd be here. Owen took the paper, expression guarded as he read its contents. Penelope watched his face change surprise, then something darker. What is it? She asked when the messenger had gone. Owen handed her the telegram. It was brief. Preston arrived. Helena, stop asking about Rhodes. Stop offering rewards. Stop. Watch your back. Stop. Miller. Who's Miller? Penelope asked, heart racing. Foreman at my ranch, Owen replied, his voice tight. Good man. Wouldn't send this unless the threat was real. Penelope felt cold despite the warm room. Preston's looking for you specifically now, not just me. Owen nodded grimly. Seems our friend doesn't appreciate interference. This is my fault, Penelope whispered. I've brought trouble to your doorstep. No, Owen's voice was firm. Preston's the one bringing trouble, not you, he considered for a moment. This changes things, though. Train might not be safe if he's put out word along the line. What do we do? Owen glanced around the dining room, his mind clearly working through options. Finish eating. Act normal. I need to think. They completed their meal in tense silence, both acutely aware of every person who entered the room, every glance that might linger too long on their table. When they finally rose to leave, Owen placed a protective hand at the small of Penelope's back, guiding her toward the stairs. Pack your things, he said quietly when they reached her door. We leave before dawn. Where will we go? Penelope asked. If the train isn't safe, I know another way, Owen interrupted. Not as fast, not as comfortable, but Preston won't expect it. His expression softened slightly. Trust me, the question was simple but carried weight beyond its words. Penelope studied his face, the eyes that had seen too much hardship yet remained kind, the set of his jaw that spoke of determination. Yes, she answered. I trust you. Something shifted in Owen's gaze, a warmth that had nothing to do with their current danger. For a moment, Penelope thought he might say more, might even reach for her. Instead, he simply nodded. Get some rest, he said. I'll knock at 4. In her room, Penelope found sleep elusive despite her exhaustion. Her mind raced with fears both old and new. Preston's reach was longer than she'd imagined if he could track them to Wyoming and specifically target Owen. The danger had escalated, becoming more personal with each passing day. And beneath these practical concerns lay another, more confusing emotion. In the midst of danger and flight, something unexpected had grown between her and the quiet cowboy who'd risked everything to help her. Something Penelope wasn't ready to name, much less acknowledge. She finally drifted into restless sleep, dreams filled with rushing water and faceless pursuers. When Owen's soft knock came at 4, she was already awake, dressed and packed. They slipped out of the hotel through a side entrance, Owen leading Merlin from the stable with minimal noise. The town was quiet, streets empty in the pre-dawn darkness. Where are we heading? Penelope whispered as they made their way toward the outskirts. South by southwest, Owen replied. There's an old trail the Cheyenne used, avoids settlements, keeps to high ground where we can see anyone following. And it leads to Denver, eventually. Takes us through part of Colorado territory first. He helped her mount Merlin. It's rough country but beautiful, and few white men know it well. As they left Sheridan behind, the eastern sky began to lighten, painting the horizon with bands of pink and gold. Penelope found herself wondering if sunrise looked like this from Owen's ranch, if the mountains caught the first light in the same way, if the vast sky opened with the same breathtaking expanse. They rode steadily through the morning, Owen setting a careful pace that would conserve Merlin's strength for the long journey ahead. The landscape gradually changed, becoming more dramatic as they moved into the foothills that would eventually rise into the Rocky Mountains. By midday, they had covered significant ground. Owen finally called a halt near a clear stream sheltered by cottonwood trees. "Need to rest, Merlin," he explained, dismounting, "and ourselves." They shared a simple meal from their new supplies: fresh bread, cheese, dried apples. The ordinary act of breaking bread together felt strangely intimate after the tensions of the previous evening. "Tell me about your ranch," Penelope said as they rested in the dappled shade. "What makes it special to you?" Owen seemed surprised by the question, but not displeased. "It's high country, good water, valley protected by mountains on three sides." His expression softened with genuine affection. "Wildflowers in spring like you wouldn't believe, blues and yellows covering the meadows. Sounds beautiful." "It is." He looked at her directly. "Peaceful too." "After everything, it was what I needed," Penelope understood. After loss, some people sought noise and distraction. Others, like Owen, sought solitude and purpose. "And you built it yourself after," she hesitated. "After the fire," he finished for her. "Yes." "Took the settlement money from the railroad blood money, really, and started over where no one knew me." He picked up a small stone, turning it in his fingers. "First year was hard, nearly gave up more than once. What kept you going?" Owen was quiet for a long moment. "Stubbornness, maybe. Or spite." His mouth quirked in a half-smile. "Didn't want them to win completely." "I understand that," Penelope said softly. "It's why I ran instead of surrendering to Preston. Spite has its uses." Owen's smile became more genuine. "That it does, Miss Hayes." "Penelope," she corrected him. "After everything, I think you've earned the right to use my given name." His expression turned thoughtful. "Penelope, then." The way he said it carefully, as if testing the feel of it on his tongue, sent an unexpected shiver through her. "We should keep moving," he said after a moment, rising to his feet. "Still a lot of ground to cover before nightfall." They continued their journey through increasingly rugged terrain. Owen proved to be an excellent guide, finding paths through seemingly impassable landscape, always mindful of leaving minimal tracks for potential pursuers. As the afternoon waned, thunder rumbled in the distance, another storm approaching from the west. "We need shelter," Owen said, scanning the rocky ridges ahead. "There's a formation I remember about 2 miles on, should have adequate overhang." They reached the spot just as the first heavy raindrops began to fall, a natural shelter formed by a massive stone outcropping. Deep enough to keep them dry, with good visibility of the surrounding area, it was an ideal campsite under the circumstances. Owen quickly set about making a small fire while Penelope arranged their bedrolls and supplies. The efficiency of their partnership struck her suddenly, how naturally they had fallen into complementary roles, anticipating each other's needs without discussion. The storm settled in for the night, less violent than the previous one but persistent. Rain drummed against the stone above them, creating a curtain of water at the edge of their shelter. The fire cast dancing shadows on the rock walls, creating a space that felt strangely intimate despite being open to the elements. "How far to Denver now?" Penelope asked as they shared their evening meal. 4 days, maybe 5 depending on weather and terrain, Owen replied. "We'll reach Colorado territory by tomorrow afternoon," Penelope nodded, watching the flames. The prospect of reaching her destination, which had seemed so urgent just days ago, now filled her with unexpected ambivalence. "Your aunt," Owen said after a while. "You're close to her." "She's my mother's sister," Penelope explained. "Visited us a few times when I was young, wrote regularly." She smiled faintly at a memory. Sent me a doll every Christmas until I was 12, then books after that. She sounds kind. She is. I haven't seen her in years, though, not since she moved to Denver after her husband died. Owen nodded, understanding. Family's important, especially after loss. Penelope studied him across the fire. Do you have family still? Besides your ranch hands, sister in St. Louis, he answered. Married with 3 children, we write occasionally. But you don't visit, Owen poked at the fire. Hard to leave the ranch. And the past has a way of following you to places where people knew you before. Penelope understood his meaning. The man he was now had been forged in tragedy. Returning to people who knew him before that transformation would mean confronting the full measure of what he'd lost. What about you? Owen asked. After Denver, do you have plans? The question caught her off guard. I haven't thought that far ahead, she admitted. Survival has been my only goal. And after survival, Penelope gazed into the fire, considering, I don't know. I've lost everything that defined me, my home, my father, my place in the world. She looked up at him. How do you start over when there's nothing left of who you were? Owen's expression held deep understanding. You build something new, not to replace what was lost, but alongside it. His voice was soft but steady. The pain doesn't go away, you just make room for other things too. The simple wisdom of his words struck Penelope deeply. Here was someone who truly understood the geography of loss, who had mapped its territories and found paths forward. Is that what you did? She asked. Made room for other things? Tried to, he answered honestly, some days more successfully than others. Outside, the storm continued its steady percussion against stone and earth. Inside their shelter, something shifted between them, a recognition, perhaps, of how their separate paths of grief had led them to this shared moment. We should rest, Owen finally said, banking the fire for the night. Long day tomorrow. Penelope nodded, settling into her bedroll. As she drifted towards sleep, she found herself wondering what it might be like to build something new, not alone, but alongside someone who understood the weight of what had come before. Morning brought clearing skies and renewed determination. They set out early, Owen leading them through passages in the rocky landscape that seemed impossible until they were navigated. By midday, they had descended into more hospitable terrain, rolling hills covered with pine forest that offered both shelter and clear visibility. Colorado territory, Owen announced as they crested a particular ridge. Denver's still a good distance, but we're making progress. The landscape was breathtaking, mountains rising majestically in the distance, valleys carved by ancient waters, forests that seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction. Despite the circumstances of their journey, Penelope found herself appreciating the wild beauty surrounding them. It's magnificent, she said softly. Owen nodded, a rare smile touching his features. This country gets in your blood, makes everywhere else seem confined. They continued through the afternoon, stopping occasionally to rest Merlin and check for signs of pursuit. So far, there had been none. Either they had successfully evaded Preston's men, or the bounty hunters had chosen an entirely different route. As evening approached, they made camp in a small clearing near a spring. The routine of setting up camp had become familiar, Owen tending to Merlin and gathering firewood while Penelope prepared their simple meal. There was comfort in the routine, in the quiet competence they had developed as a team. After dinner, as they sat beside the fire, Owen produced a small flask from his saddlebag. Thought we might have earned this, he said, offering it to Penelope. She took a careful sip, the whiskey burning pleasantly as it went down. Celebrating our progress. Celebrating still being alive, Owen replied with a hint of dry humor. Always worth acknowledging. Penelope smiled, passing the flask back. A worthy toast. A comfortable silence settled between them, broken only by the crackling fire and distant night sounds of the forest. Stars appeared overhead, brilliant in the clear mountain air. Can I ask you something? Penelope said eventually. Owen nodded, his expression open. That day by the creek when the bounty hunters found us, you could have left me, crossed alone, continued on your way. She met his gaze directly. Why didn't you? The question had been circling in her mind for days. Owen Rhodes had no obligation to her beyond the initial help he'd offered. Yet he had stayed, putting himself at increasing risk as Preston's reach extended beyond Montana. Owen considered her question carefully. There are decisions that define who you are, he finally said. Walking away would have been one of those. He looked into the fire. I've made mistakes in my life, things I regret, but I try not to add to that list when I can help it. Is that all it was, avoiding regret? His gaze returned to her face, steady and honest. No, the single word held more meaning than a longer explanation might have. Penelope felt her heartbeat quicken at what remained unspoken between them. I'm not good at this, Owen continued after a moment. Words, explaining. He gestured vaguely. Feelings. You don't need to explain, Penelope said softly. Maybe I do. He set the flask aside. When I found you that day, you were fighting, outnumbered, outgunned, but fighting anyway. Something in his expression intensified. Reminded me there are still things worth fighting for. The simple honesty of his words touched Penelope deeply. Owen, a twig snapped in the darkness beyond their camp. Owen was on his feet in an instant, gun drawn, positioning himself between Penelope and the sound. She reached for her own revolver, heart pounding. Who's there? Owen called, voice hard with warning. Silence stretched for several seconds. Then a voice answered from the darkness. Easy, friend, just travelers like yourselves. Two figures emerged slowly into the firelight, hands raised to show they were unarmed. A man and a woman, both wearing trail-worn clothes and expressions of cautious friendliness. Apologies for startling you, the man continued. He was middle-aged, with a graying beard and the weathered look of someone who spent most of his life outdoors. Saw your fire, thought we'd introduce ourselves before making camp nearby. Owen didn't lower his gun immediately. You're far from the main trails. The woman stepped forward slightly. She was perhaps a few years older than Penelope, with dark hair pulled back in a practical braid. We're surveying for the Colorado Geological Society, she explained, mapping the lesser-known regions. This seemed to ease Owen's suspicions somewhat, though he remained alert. That's government work, usually. Private commission, the man replied. Name's Daniel Morris. This is my colleague, Rebecca Saunders. Owen finally lowered his weapon, though he didn't holster it. Owen Rhodes, this is Penelope Hayes. Pleased to meet you both, Morris said with a nod. Mind if we make our camp a little ways down? Been a long day of hiking. Owen and Penelope exchanged glances. Having strangers nearby was a risk, but refusing would seem suspicious and possibly more dangerous if these people weren't as innocent as they claimed. There's a good spot about 100 yards that way, Owen finally said, gesturing. Spring's just beyond it. Much obliged, Morris replied with a friendly nod. Perhaps we'll see you in the morning before we head out. As the strangers disappeared back into the darkness, Owen finally holstered his gun, though tension remained evident in his posture. What do you think? Penelope asked quietly. Could be exactly who they say, Owen replied, returning to his place by the fire. Geological survey makes sense in this region. But you're not convinced, he shook his head slightly. Just being cautious, we'll take extra watches tonight. The unexpected encounter had disrupted the intimate moment that had been building between them. Penelope felt a pang of regret, wondering if the opportunity to speak openly had been lost. I'll take first watch, she offered. Owen looked like he wanted to object but nodded instead. Wake me in 4 hours. As Penelope kept vigilant watch through the quiet hours, she reflected on what Owen had begun to share before the interruption. There was something growing between them, something neither had anticipated when their paths first crossed. Whether it had a future beyond their journey to Denver remained uncertain, but she could no longer deny its existence. The night passed without incident. When morning came, their neighbors appeared briefly to exchange pleasantries, before heading in a different direction. Whether they were truly surveyors or something else, they seemed to pose no immediate threat. Owen and Penelope resumed their journey, pushing deeper into Colorado territory. The day was clear, the terrain challenging but navigable. By mid-afternoon, they had made excellent progress. Another 2 days at this pace, Owen estimated as they paused to rest Merlin. 3 at most, Penelope nodded, gazing at the distant mountains. The thought of reaching Denver, once so desperately desired, now filled her with complicated emotions. "What will you do?" she asked suddenly. "After you've delivered me to my aunt." Owen glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "Return to my ranch, I suppose." "Is that what you want?" He was quiet for a long moment. "What I want." He trailed off, then tried again. "Things aren't always about want." Penelope felt a surge of frustration at his evasiveness. "Aren't they? After everything we've been through, can't we at least be honest about that?" Owen studied her face, something vulnerable entering his eyes. "Penelope," the distant crack of a rifle interrupted whatever he had been about to say. A bullet splintered bark from a tree just feet from where they stood. "Down!" Owen shouted, pulling Penelope to the ground as more shots followed. They scrambled behind a fallen log, hearts pounding. Owen drew his revolver, trying to locate the shooter. "At least 2, he muttered, peering carefully over their cover. "Maybe 3. The surveyors?" Penelope asked, clutching her own gun. "Possibly, or they led others to us." He glanced at Merlin, who had fortunately moved to a position partially sheltered by trees. "We need to get to higher ground." Another volley of shots peppered their position. One bullet struck the log directly in front of Owen, sending splinters flying. "They're moving closer," Penelope observed, trying to keep her voice steady. Owen scanned their surroundings, assessing options. "There's a ridge about 40 yards back. Better position, better cover, but we'll be exposed getting there." "I'll cover you," Penelope said firmly. "Then you cover me." Owen looked like he wanted to argue but nodded instead. "On my signal." He waited for a pause in the shooting, then nodded sharply. Penelope rose slightly, firing 3 rapid shots in the direction of their attackers. Owen sprinted toward the ridge, diving into position behind a cluster of boulders. He immediately returned fire, providing Penelope her chance to move. She ran in a zigzag pattern as bullets kicked up dirt around her. Just as she reached the relative safety of the ridge, pain exploded in her left arm. A bullet had grazed her, tearing through sleeve and skin. "You're hit," Owen said, pulling her fully behind cover. "Just a graze," Penelope replied through gritted teeth. "I'm all right." Owen quickly tore a strip from his bandana, binding the wound tightly. "We need to get out of here. They have the advantage of numbers." "Merlin, I'll get him. You keep their heads down." Before Penelope could protest, Owen was moving, staying low, using available cover as he worked his way toward the stallion. She fired carefully, making each shot count, forcing their attackers to keep their distance. Owen reached Merlin, grabbing the reins and leading the horse in a crouching run toward their position. A bullet struck near his feet, but he kept moving, determination evident in every line of his body. When he reached the ridge, he was breathing hard but unharmed. "There's a ravine on the other side. If we can get down it, we might lose them in the forest below." Penelope nodded, wincing as pain radiated from her wound. "Let's go." They mounted Merlin quickly, Owen in front, Penelope holding tight behind him with her good arm. As they crested the ridge, exposing themselves momentarily, a fusillade of bullets followed them, but they were already moving down the steep slope on the other side, Merlin picking his way with remarkable sure-footedness. The ravine was treacherous, loose shale and steep drops that would have been challenging even without pursuers. Owen guided Merlin expertly, choosing the safest route while maintaining as much speed as possible. Behind them, shouts indicated their attackers were following, though the difficult terrain slowed their pursuit considerably. At the bottom of the ravine, they entered dense forest old-growth pines, creating a shadowy world of filtered light and natural barriers. Owen pushed deeper, following game trails that twisted unpredictably through the underbrush. For nearly an hour they rode hard, stopping only when Merlin began to show signs of fatigue. In a small clearing beside a narrow stream, Owen finally reined the stallion to a halt. "Need to let him rest," he said, dismounting quickly to help Penelope down. "And check your arm." Penelope's wound had soaked through the makeshift bandage, her sleeve stiff with dried blood. Owen led her to the stream, gently removing the bandana to examine the injury. "Clean through," he said with evident relief. "Missed the muscle, should heal well if we keep it clean." He washed the wound carefully, his touch gentle despite the urgency of their situation. Penelope watched his face as he worked, the concentration in his eyes, the firm set of his mouth, the lines of worry etched around both. "Who were they?" she asked as he bound the wound with a fresh strip of cloth from his spare shirt. "Not the bounty hunters from before," Owen replied grimly. "Different men. Preston must have hired more. How did they find us? We were so careful." Owen shook his head. "The surveyors maybe, or someone in Sheridan recognized us and sent word ahead." He finished securing the bandage. "How does that feel?" "Better," Penelope answered, though the pain remained sharp. "Thank you." Owen nodded, his gaze lingering on her face. Something shifted in his expression, a softening, a decision reached. "I was afraid," he said quietly. "When that bullet hit you." The simple admission carried more weight than a more dramatic declaration might have. Penelope understood what it cost this reserved man to acknowledge fear. "I'm all right," she assured him, "this time." Owen's hand remained on her arm, just below the bandage, but Preston won't stop. "Not until what?" Penelope prompted when he fell silent. Owen's eyes held hers steadily. "Until he's made to stop." The implication was clear. This wouldn't end with her safe arrival in Denver. Preston's vendetta had expanded to include Owen now, and the banker had demonstrated both resources and determination. "What are you suggesting?" Penelope asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. "After Denver," Owen said slowly, "I'm going back to Montana, to end this." "You mean to confront Preston directly?" It wasn't a question. Owen nodded once. "Man like that only understands one language, and you speak it." Again, not a question, a grim smile touched Owen's lips. "Learned it in the war, got fluent after Sarah died." Penelope placed her hand over his where it still rested on her arm. "You can't face him alone." "Can't ask anyone else to risk." "You're not asking," Penelope interrupted firmly. "I'm telling you, Preston is my fight too, more mine than yours, in fact." Owen studied her face, seeing the determination there. "You've lost enough already, so have you." Her grip on his hand tightened. "Whatever happens after Denver, we face it together." Something changed in Owen's expression, a barrier falling, a decision made. His free hand moved to Penelope's face, fingers gentle against her cheek. "You should know," he said softly, "if we do this, there's no guarantee of the outcome. Preston has money influence. Even if we succeed, there will be consequences." "I understand," Penelope replied, holding his gaze. "Some things are worth the risk." The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken emotions and acknowledged truths. Then Owen leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished. Penelope met him halfway. The kiss was gentle, at first tentative. Questioning then deepened as they each found their answer in the other. In the midst of danger and uncertainty, they had discovered something neither had been looking for. A connection that defied logic yet felt inevitable. When they finally broke apart, Owen rested his forehead against hers. "Didn't plan on this," he murmured. Penelope smiled slightly. "Nor did I." The sound of distant voices shattered the moment. Their pursuers had not given up. "We need to move," Owen said, reluctantly pulling away. "They're still tracking us." They mounted quickly, Owen supporting Penelope's injured arm as she settled behind him. As Merlin carried them deeper into the forest, Penelope held tight to Owen, drawing strength from his solid presence. Whatever came next in Denver, in Montana, in the uncertain future beyond, they would face it together. That knowledge didn't eliminate the danger, but it transformed it somehow, making it a challenge to be overcome rather than a fate to be endured. The following days blurred together in a tense rhythm of travel and vigilance. They took more circuitous routes, avoided open ground, and traveled during hours when pursuit would be most difficult. Owen's knowledge of the terrain proved invaluable as he led them through passages that seemed impassable until navigated. Penelope's wound healed well under Owen's careful attention. The pain receded to a dull ache, and her strength returned steadily. More significant was the change in their relationship. The barriers of formality and caution had fallen away, replaced by an honesty that was both exhilarating and terrifying in its implications. On what Owen estimated to be their final night before reaching Denver, they made camp in a sheltered hollow beneath towering pines. There had been no sign of pursuit for over a day, though neither was willing to assume safety just yet. As they sat beside their small fire, the reality of their imminent arrival in Denver hung between them, the end point of one journey, the potential beginning of another far more dangerous. "We should discuss what happens next," Owen said, breaking a comfortable silence. "Practically speaking." Penelope nodded, watching the flames. "My aunt's house first, to ensure she's safe and to establish my presence in Denver publicly." "Agreed, it gives us legitimate reason to be there." Owen poked at the fire thoughtfully. "From there, I need to send word to my ranch, make arrangements." "And then," Owen's expression turned resolute, "then we return to Montana, not directly to Silverdale but close. Gather information first, Preston's routines, his security, his vulnerabilities." "You're talking about killing him," Penelope said quietly. Not an accusation, merely a recognition of what remained unspoken. Owen met her gaze steadily. "I'm talking about justice. If that can come through legal means, all the better." His jaw tightened. "But I don't expect it will." Penelope considered this. The magnitude of what they were contemplating should have frightened her more than it did. Yet after everything Preston had taken from her father, her home, her sense of security, the prospect of confronting him directly held a certain rightness. "Whatever happens," she said finally, "I want to be part of it, not waiting safely in Denver while you take all the risk." Owen studied her face in the firelight. "It won't be safe." "Nothing worth doing ever is," Penelope replied simply. A small smile touched Owen's lips. "You're a remarkable woman, Penelope Hayes." "I'm a survivor," she corrected him. "Like you." Owen reached across the space between them, taking her hand in his. The simple contact felt more intimate than their earlier kiss, a promise, an acknowledgement of the path they had chosen together. "There's something else we should discuss," he said, his voice taking on a different quality. "Something I've been thinking about." Penelope's heart quickened at his tone. "What is it?" Owen seemed to struggle with words momentarily, unusual for a man who typically spoke with such directness. "After this is finished one way or another, I'll be returning to my ranch." "I know," Penelope said softly. "It's remote, beautiful but isolated. The nearest town is half a day's ride." His thumb traced gentle patterns on her hand. Not much society for someone used to larger settlements. Penelope understood what he was trying to say and what he was asking without asking directly. "Are you warning me off or extending an invitation, Mr. Rhodes?" The use of his formal name brought a slight smile to his lips. "Bit of both, perhaps." His expression turned serious again. "I want you to know what it would mean before you make any decisions." "You think I haven't considered it?" Penelope asked. "The isolation, the work, the danger that might follow us even after Preston, it's a lot to ask of anyone," Owen replied. "Especially someone who's already lost so much." Penelope shifted closer, her free hand rising to touch his face. "What if I told you I've been thinking about wildflowers in spring, about valleys protected by mountains and skies that go on forever?" Something hopeful flickered in Owen's eyes. "I'd say you have a romantic notion of ranching life." "Perhaps," she acknowledged with a small smile, "or perhaps I've developed a romantic notion of the rancher." Owen turned his face to press a kiss against her palm. "I don't have much to offer beyond hard work and honest living. You offer freedom," Penelope said simply. "Safety, purpose." She met his gaze directly. "And yourself, that's not nothing, Owen Rhodes." He drew her closer then, his kiss conveying what words could not promise: passion and a tenderness that belied his weathered exterior. When they separated, both were breathing unsteadily. "I don't want to pressure you," Owen said quietly. "After Denver, after Preston, you should take time, be certain." Penelope understood his caution. They had found each other under extraordinary circumstances, their connection forged in danger and necessity. What worked on the trail might not translate to ordinary life. "I appreciate that," she replied honestly, "and I'll consider it carefully." Her expression turned determined. "But first we deal with Preston." Owen nodded, his face settling into resolute lines. "First Preston." They spoke long into the night, planning strategies, considering contingencies, preparing for the confrontation that lay ahead. When they finally slept, it was side by side, drawing comfort from each other's presence in what might be their last peaceful night for some time. Morning brought them to the outskirts of Denver. The city spread before them in the valley, a growing metropolis of the West, bustling with the energy of commerce and expansion. Smoke rose from factories and homes, church spires punctuated the skyline, and the distant clatter of trains suggested connections to the wider world beyond. "There it is," Owen said as they paused on a ridge overlooking the city. "Journey's End." Penelope felt a complex mixture of emotions as she gazed at Denver: relief at reaching their immediate destination safely, apprehension about what came next, and reluctance to conclude this chapter of their journey together. "Not an end," she corrected softly, "just a waypoint." Owen glanced at her, a rare full smile transforming his features. "Well said." They rode into the city mid-morning, Merlin's hooves clattering on cobblestones as they navigated increasingly crowded streets. Penelope had the address for her aunt's home, and shop in a neighborhood on the city's west side, a respectable area for small business owners and skilled tradespeople. The dressmaking shop occupied the ground floor of a narrow 3-story building, with Hayes Fine Apparel painted in elegant script across the large front window. A bell jingled cheerfully as they entered, drawing the attention of a middle-aged woman helping a customer select fabric. "One moment, please," the woman called before returning to her client. Penelope studied her Aunt Catherine Hayes had aged since their last meeting, silver threading through her dark hair, fine lines around her eyes suggesting both laughter and hardship. But her movements remained energetic, her manner confident as she advised on suitable materials for a walking dress. When the customer finally departed with promises to return for a fitting, Catherine turned to her new visitors with a professional smile that faltered as recognition dawned. "Penelope," she whispered, disbelief evident in her voice. "Is it truly you?" Penelope stepped forward, suddenly overcome with emotion. "Hello, Aunt Catherine." The older woman crossed the space between them in quick steps, enfolding Penelope in a fierce embrace. "My dear girl. Your letter said you were coming, but that was weeks ago. I'd begun to fear," she broke off, pulling back to examine her niece with concerned eyes. "What happened? You're injured." "It's a long story," Penelope replied, suddenly aware of how they must appear trail-worn, dusty, bearing visible signs of their difficult journey. Catherine noticed Owen then, her expression turning cautious. "And who might this gentleman be?" "Owen Rhodes," he answered, removing his hat respectfully. "I've been escorting Miss Hayes from Montana Territory." Catherine's eyebrows rose slightly as she assessed the cowboy. Whatever she saw in him seemed to ease her concerns somewhat. "Well, Mr. Rhodes, it appears I owe you my gratitude." She turned back to her niece. "Come upstairs, both of you. You look exhausted and I want to hear everything." She locked the shop door, turned the sign to "closed," and led them through a back door and up a narrow staircase to her living quarters above. The apartment was modest but comfortable, well furnished, immaculately clean, with large windows overlooking the street below. Sit," Catherine insisted, gesturing to a small parlor. "I'll make tea and you can tell me what's happened." Over the next hour, Penelope related the events of the past weeks: her father's death, Preston's claims, her flight, and Owen's intervention. She edited certain details, particularly the nature of their developing relationship, but was otherwise truthful about the dangers they had faced. Catherine listened with growing horror and indignation. "This Preston sounds absolutely monstrous," she declared when Penelope finished, "and to think he still pursues you. The authorities must be informed immediately." "It's not that simple," Owen said quietly. "Preston has influence, connections. In territories like Montana, men with money often operate above conventional law." "Then what do you intend to do?" Catherine asked, her sharp gaze moving between them. "Surely you don't mean to return and confront him?" Penelope exchanged glances with Owen. "We haven't decided our next steps yet," she answered carefully. "For now, I just need rest and time to consider options." Catherine seemed skeptical but didn't press further. "Of course, you'll stay here as long as needed." She turned to Owen. "Mr. Rhodes, I insist you remain as well. The third floor has a small guest room that would suit you." Owen hesitated. "I wouldn't want to impose." "Nonsense," Catherine replied firmly. "You've protected my niece at great personal risk. The least I can offer is proper hospitality." The matter settled, Catherine showed them to their respective rooms, Penelope to a comfortable chamber adjacent to her aunt's, Owen to the more Spartan accommodations above. After weeks on the trail, even the simple luxuries of clean linens and privacy felt extraordinary. Freshly bathed and dressed in clothes borrowed from her aunt's shop, Penelope felt almost like her former self again. She joined Catherine in the kitchen, helping prepare the evening meal while Owen saw to Merlin's stabling at a nearby livery. "He seems a good man," Catherine observed as they worked. "You're Mr. Rhodes." Penelope nearly dropped the knife she was using to chop vegetables. "He's not my Mr. Rhodes." Catherine's knowing smile suggested she wasn't fooled. "Perhaps not officially, but I wasn't born yesterday, my dear." She continued kneading dough for bread. "The way you look at each other tells its own story." Penelope felt heat rise in her cheeks. "It's complicated." "The best things usually are." Catherine glanced at her niece. "What are your intentions toward him?" The directness of the question startled a laugh from Penelope. "Shouldn't you be asking about his intentions toward me?" "I suspect I already know those," Catherine replied calmly. "He's a man who knows his own mind. The question is whether you know yours." Penelope considered this as she continued chopping. Did she know her own mind? The feelings that had developed for Owen were undeniable, but they had formed under extraordinary circumstances. What would they become in ordinary life? "I care for him," she admitted finally. "More than I expected to. But we've only known each other a short time, and much of that has been spent running for our lives." Catherine nodded, understanding. "Not ideal conditions for courtship, certainly." "He has a ranch in Montana," Penelope continued. "He's suggested I might consider joining him there. After everything with Preston is resolved." "And would you want that? A life in the wilds of Montana?" Penelope paused, knife hovering over the cutting board. "A month ago I would have said no without hesitation. Now," she shook her head slightly, "now I find myself imagining it. The space, the freedom, the chance to build something new." "With him," Catherine added softly. "Yes," Penelope acknowledged. "With him." Catherine wiped her hands on her apron, turning to face her niece directly. "Life offers few certainties, my dear. Sometimes we must simply trust our instincts and leap. Even when the leap might lead to more loss, especially then." Catherine's expression turned wistful. "After your uncle died, I had opportunities to remarry, chose safety instead. It's not a bad life I've built, but sometimes I wonder." The conversation paused as they heard Owen's boots on the stairs. He entered the kitchen looking refreshed, having also bathed and changed into cleaner clothes. "Merlin's settled," he reported. "Livery seems well run." "Excellent," Catherine replied, smoothly shifting back to hostess mode. "Dinner will be ready shortly. Perhaps you'd be kind enough to set the table, Mr. Rhodes." The evening passed pleasantly, the simple domesticity of sharing a meal creating a temporary bubble of normalcy around them. Catherine proved to be an engaging conversationalist, drawing Owen out more than Penelope had managed in their early days together. After dinner, as they sat in the small parlor with coffee, Catherine finally broached the subject they had been avoiding. "I understand you're planning something regarding this banker," she said directly. "I'd appreciate honesty about what that entails." Owen and Penelope exchanged glances. "We intend to return to Montana," Owen answered after a moment, "to address the threat Preston poses." "Address how exactly?" Catherine pressed. "By whatever means necessary," Penelope replied firmly. Catherine studied them both for a long moment. "I see." She set her coffee cup down decisively. "Then you'll need help." This was not the response either had expected. "Aunt Catherine," Penelope began. "I'm not offering to accompany you," Catherine clarified, "but I have connections that might prove useful. My late husband had business associates throughout the territories, including Montana." Her expression turned determined. "If you're set on this course, better you have proper resources." Owen leaned forward slightly. "What kind of resources?" "Information, primarily. Names of people who might support your cause." Catherine's smile held a hint of steel. "Willard Preston isn't the only one with connections." The conversation continued late into the evening, Catherine revealing aspects of her life and connections that surprised Penelope. The prim dressmaker had unexpected depths and a pragmatic understanding of frontier justice that belied her respectable facade. When they finally retired for the night, Penelope found herself standing in the hallway between her room and the stairs leading to Owen's, torn between propriety and desire. "Complicated, isn't it?" Owen's soft voice came from the top of the stairs. He had anticipated her dilemma. Penelope smiled up at him. "Terribly." He descended a few steps, stopping halfway. "Your aunt is a remarkable woman. Apparently so. I had no idea she had such resources. People surprise you out here in the West." Owen's expression was tender in the dim hallway light. "Especially women who have had to make their own way." Penelope climbed a few steps toward him, meeting him in the middle. "I should go to my room." "You should," he agreed, making no move to leave. She reached for his hand, twining her fingers with his. "Tomorrow we begin planning in earnest." Owen nodded, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "With your aunt's help, we have better chances than I'd hoped. Are you afraid?" Penelope asked softly. "Of Preston?" "No," his gaze held hers steadily. "Of losing what we've found, yes." The simple honesty of his answer touched her deeply. Penelope rose on tiptoes, pressing a gentle kiss to his lips. "Then we'll just have to make sure that doesn't happen." Owen's free hand came up to cup her face, deepening the kiss for a moment before reluctantly pulling away. "Good night, Penelope." "Good night, Owen." They separated, each to their own room, though Penelope suspected neither would sleep easily. They stood at a crossroads, the safety of Denver behind them, the danger of confronting Preston ahead, and between those certainties, the fragile possibility of a future together. The following days were consumed with preparation. Catherine proved true to her word, connecting them with individuals who provided valuable information about Preston's operations, his security arrangements, and the political landscape in Montana Territory. One contact, a former territorial judge with extensive knowledge of banking laws, provided particularly useful insights. "Preston's been operating in legal gray areas for years," the judge explained during a discreet meeting in Catherine's parlor. "Using loans to acquire property, then manipulating terms after the fact. Your father's case isn't unique, Miss Hayes." "Can he be stopped legally?" Penelope asked. The judge's expression was grave. "With sufficient evidence and the right authorities, yes. But that evidence would need to be compelling. Records of altered loan documents, testimony from multiple victims, proof of bribery or coercion. And where would we find such evidence?" Owen inquired. "Preston keeps detailed records." "Man's meticulous about his paperwork. It's how he ensures his schemes appear legitimate." The judge leaned forward. "Those records would be in his office at the bank, or possibly his home." This information shifted their planning significantly. What had begun as a potentially violent confrontation evolved into something more strategic: a mission to obtain evidence that could bring Preston down through legal channels. "It's still dangerous," Owen cautioned as they discussed the new approach. "Breaking into either location would be considered criminal regardless of our motives. But if we succeed," Penelope countered, "we end this permanently without bloodshed." The moral calculus was clear to both of them. If they could destroy Preston's power without killing him, that was the preferable path, not out of mercy for the banker, but for their own futures. Catherine continued to provide support, offering her home as a secure base for their planning and contributing practical assistance in the form of appropriate clothing, supplies, and introductions to trustworthy allies. A week after their arrival in Denver, they felt ready to proceed. Their plan was set, their resources secured, their determination undiminished. The only remaining question was personal rather than tactical. On their final evening before departure, Penelope found Owen on the small balcony outside Catherine's parlor, gazing at the city lights spreading below them. "Everything's ready," she said, joining him at the railing. "We leave at first light." Owen nodded, his profile sharp against the darkening sky. "Your aunt has been invaluable. We have a real chance now." "Yes." Penelope hesitated, then pressed forward with what she really wanted to discuss. "I've been thinking about your ranch." Owen turned to face her fully, his expression carefully neutral. And I want to see those wildflowers you described," Penelope said simply. "I want to know if the valley is as beautiful as you claim." Hope kindled in Owen's eyes, though he maintained his characteristic caution. "It's not an easy life." "Few worthwhile things are," Penelope replied, echoing his own words from days earlier. "I'm not promising forever, Owen, just a beginning. A chance to discover what we might be together without danger forcing our hand." Owen reached for her then, drawing her into his arms with a tenderness that belied his strength. "That's more than I dared hope for. I want to be clear," Penelope continued, needing him to understand fully. "I'm not looking to replace what I've lost, or what you lost. We both carry those wounds." "I know," Owen murmured, his breath warm against her hair. "But perhaps we can build something new, something that honors the past without being defined by it." Owen pulled back slightly to meet her gaze. "I don't want to be loved out of gratitude, Penelope, or obligation." The vulnerability in his voice touched her deeply. "I don't want to be loved," she whispered, echoing her own fears of dependency, of loss. Understanding dawned in Owen's eyes. He cradled her face in his weathered hands, his voice soft but certain. "Then let me need you instead." The simple words unlocked something in Penelope's heart, a recognition that what existed between them wasn't just attraction or circumstantial bonding, but something more fundamental. They had each found in the other not just a companion, but a necessity. Their kiss sealed this understanding, not a promise of forever, but a commitment to possibility. Whatever awaited them in Montana, they would face it together. Dawn broke clear and cold as they prepared to depart. Catherine embraced Penelope fiercely at the door. "Be careful," she urged. "And remember, no matter what happens, you always have a home here." "Thank you," Penelope replied, throat tight with emotion, "for everything." Catherine turned to Owen next, surprising him with an equally firm embrace. "Bring her back safely, Mr. Rhodes, preferably as Mrs. Rhodes, but I'll leave those details to you both." Owen's usually stoic expression softened. "Yes, madam, that's my intention." With final farewells and promises to send word of their progress, they mounted Merlin, now rested and eager after his week in Denver, and began the journey back toward Montana. The return trip followed a different route than their flight to Denver. Now they traveled with purpose rather than fear, their path more direct, their movements calculated rather than reactive. Owen had sent telegrams to his ranch, arranging for trusted hands to meet them at a predetermined location near the Montana border. As they rode north, the landscape gradually changed, prairie giving way to foothills, foothills rising toward mountains. The natural beauty surrounding them seemed more vivid to Penelope now that she viewed it not as obstacles to escape, but as potential home. "Tell me more about your ranch," she requested during an evening camp. "The practical details this time, not just the pretty scenery." Owen smiled at her directness. "Three-room cabin, solid construction, barn needs work, about 100 head of cattle, decent bloodlines." He poked at their campfire thoughtfully. "Good water rights, which matters more than gold out here, enough arable land to grow what we need. And your hands, the men who work for you, 4 regulars. Miller, my foreman, has been with me since the beginning, former cavalry like me. Then there's Daniels, Williams, and Rodriguez. Good men, reliable." Owen glanced at her. "They live in a bunkhouse about a quarter mile from the main cabin, close enough if there's trouble, far enough for privacy." Penelope absorbed these details, mentally constructing the life they described. "Would they accept a woman's presence? Your men, they'll respect you," Owen replied with certainty. "Especially once they know what you've been through, what you're capable of." The confidence in his assessment warmed her. Owen saw her not as someone to be protected, but as a partner whose strength complemented his own. "And the nearest town?" she asked, continuing her practical inventory. "Elkridge. Small place, about half a day's ride, has the necessities general store, doctor, small church." Owen's mouth quirked in a half-smile. "Not much society, as I warned you." "I've had enough society to last a lifetime," Penelope replied dryly. "Peace sounds far more appealing." They continued discussing practical matters, the seasonal rhythms of ranch life, the challenges of winters in Montana, the small community of scattered ranches in the valley. Penelope asked direct questions, and Owen answered honestly, neither romanticizing nor downplaying the realities. By the time they reached the Montana border 5 days later, Penelope had developed a clearer picture of what life at Rhodes Ranch might entail. The vision appealed to her more than she had anticipated, not despite its challenges, but partly because of them. As planned, 2 of Owen's hands, Miller and Rodriguez, met them just inside Montana territory. Both men greeted their boss with evident relief and respect. "Been worried, boss," Miller admitted, a weathered man about Owen's age with a cavalry trooper's straight posture. "Preston's men have been asking questions all over the territory." "Any trouble at the ranch?" Owen asked as they made camp that evening. Miller shook his head. "Nothing direct, but there's talk in Elkridge that Preston's offering serious money for information about you." "And the other matter I asked about?" Owen inquired, his tone deliberately casual. Miller glanced at Rodriguez, who nodded confirmation. "Done as you requested, all arranged." Penelope raised a questioning eyebrow at Owen, who explained, "I asked them to make certain preparations." "Legal matters, primarily." She understood his meaning. Owen had been arranging contingencies in case their confrontation with Preston went badly, ensuring his ranch and affairs were in order. The next day, they diverged from the direct route to Silverdale, instead heading toward Owen's ranch. The strategic decision would allow them time to finalize their plans without risk of detection, and would provide Penelope her first glimpse of what might become her future home. As they crested a particular ridge late in the afternoon, Owen reined Merlin to a halt. "There it is," he said simply. Below them stretched a valley cradled by mountains on 3 sides, a silver ribbon of river winding through its center. The ranch buildings were visible in the distance, a sturdy cabin with smoke rising from its chimney, a large barn, corrals, and smaller outbuildings arranged in practical proximity. Cattle grazed on the lush grass of early summer, and patches of wildflowers dotted the meadows just as Owen had described. "It's beautiful," Penelope said softly, understanding now why this place had healed something in Owen after his losses. There was peace here and purpose, and the kind of beauty that settled into one's soul rather than merely pleasing the eye. Owen watched her reaction carefully. "It's not much compared to some spreads." "It's exactly as you described," Penelope replied, turning to meet his gaze. "It feels like somewhere a person could breathe." Something in Owen's expression eased at her words a tension he perhaps hadn't realized he was carrying. He had shown her his sanctuary, and she had recognized its value. They rode down into the valley as sunset painted the landscape in gold and amber. By the time they reached the ranch yard, twilight was gathering, lending a dreamlike quality to Penelope's first close view of what might become her home. The remaining ranch hands Daniels and Williams emerged from the bunkhouse to greet their employer's return. Both men cast curious glances at Penelope, but were too well-mannered to ask direct questions. Owen made brief introductions, explaining only that Miss Hayes was under his protection and would be staying at the ranch while they attended to business in Silverdale. The men accepted this with the matter-of-fact pragmatism of those accustomed to the territory's unconventional arrangements. Inside the cabin, Penelope found herself pleasantly surprised. The main room combined kitchen and living space, with sturdy furniture built for comfort rather than style. Bookshelves lined one wall. Owen's literary interests apparently ran to history, practical manuals, and the occasional novel. Everything was clean and orderly, if simple. 2 doors led off the main room, one to Owen's bedroom, the other to a smaller room he explained had been intended as an office, but remained largely unused. "You'll stay here," he said, showing her the main bedroom. "I'll bunk with the men until we head to Silverdale." Penelope began to protest, but Owen shook his head firmly. "Your reputation's suffered enough association with me. No need to give anyone more reason for talk." She recognized the wisdom in his caution, though part of her, the part that had grown accustomed to his presence during their journey, regretted the separation. That evening, after a hearty meal prepared by Rodriguez, who apparently served as the ranch's primary cook, Owen met privately with his men to brief them on the situation with Preston. Penelope excused herself to allow them to speak freely, using the opportunity to explore the cabin more thoroughly. In Owen's bedroom, she found few personal items, but those present were revealing a silver pocket watch engraved with initials not his own, his father's perhaps. A small framed drawing of a woman holding a child, Sarah and their son, she assumed. A cavalry medal tucked half-hidden in a drawer. The artifacts of a life marked by both love and loss, much like her own. Later, as she prepared for bed in the surprising luxury of a real mattress with clean linens, Owen knocked softly at the door. "Everything all right?" he asked when she bid him enter. Penelope nodded, suddenly conscious of the intimacy of the setting her in borrowed nightclothes, him standing somewhat awkwardly in the doorway of his own bedroom. "The men are fully briefed," Owen continued, maintaining a respectful distance. "They've agreed to help with our plan. Miller and Rodriguez will accompany us to Silverdale tomorrow, and the others will maintain the ranch and provide backup if needed." Owen hesitated, then added, "They also know about us, whatever that may be." Penelope smiled slightly at his careful phrasing. "And they approve." "Not their place to approve or disapprove," Owen replied, though a hint of color touched his cheekbones. "But yes, they seemed pleased." The thought of these rough men silently rooting for their boss's happiness touched Penelope unexpectedly. She crossed the room to where Owen stood, rising on tiptoes to press a gentle kiss to his lips. "Thank you," she said softly, "for sharing this place with me, for trusting me with these people who matter to you." Owen's hands settled at her waist, his expression serious. "Tomorrow we ride into danger. I wanted you to see this first, to know what might be possible after." The unspoken question hung between them. If they succeeded, if they survived, would she choose this life? "This man, I'm glad I've seen it," Penelope replied honestly. "It helps make real what we're fighting for." Owen nodded, understanding her meaning. He pressed a final, lingering kiss to her forehead before reluctantly stepping back. "Rest well," he said. "Tomorrow will test us both." Morning brought final preparations for their journey to Silverdale. Owen and his men checked weapons, discussed contingencies, and reviewed the intelligence they had gathered about Preston's movements and security. Their plan was methodical: arrive in Silverdale after dark, observe Preston's routine for a day, then move when the opportunity presented itself. Their primary target was the bank vault where Preston kept his most sensitive records. By mid-morning, they were ready to depart. Owen, Penelope, Miller, and Rodriguez would make the journey, while Daniels and Williams remained at the ranch, ready to provide assistance if needed. As they mounted their horses, Penelope took a final look at the ranch, the peaceful valley, the solid cabin, the promise of a life so different from what she had known before. Whatever happened in Silverdale, she had made her decision. If they succeeded, she would return here. Not as a visitor, but as a woman choosing her future. The ride to Silverdale took most of the day, their approach deliberately indirect to avoid detection. They made camp several miles outside town, planning to enter after nightfall when they could move with less notice. As dusk gathered around their small campfire, Owen reviewed the plan one final time. Miller and I will scout the bank first, assess security. Rodriguez stays with Penelope until we signal it's clear. Penelope frowned. I should go with you. I know the bank's layout. My father did business there for years. Owen hesitated, then nodded. All right, but you stay back until we're certain it's safe. They entered Silverdale like shadows, 4 riders moving quietly through the darkened streets of a town mostly settled for the night. A few saloons still showed lights and spilled noise, but the main thoroughfare was largely deserted. They left their horses at a livery on the edge of town, paying extra for the stableman's discretion, then proceeded on foot toward the center of town where the Silverdale Bank stood, an imposing 2-story brick building that represented Preston's power in the community. From a sheltered position across the street, they observed the bank. A single light burned in an upstairs window. Preston's office, Penelope confirmed, suggesting the banker was working late. This complicates things, Owen murmured. We needed the building empty. Or it simplifies them, Miller suggested quietly. Man's alone up there, might be our best chance to confront him directly. Owen considered this, exchanging glances with Penelope. Their original plan had been to enter the bank after hours, locate the incriminating documents, and depart without direct confrontation. But Miller's suggestion had merit. Catching Preston alone with access to his records might be more effective. It's riskier, Owen said, but potentially more decisive. Penelope nodded agreement. We came for justice. This may be our best opportunity. The decision made, they modified their approach. Miller would watch the front entrance while Rodriguez covered the rear of the building. Owen and Penelope would enter through a side door that building plans, secured through Catherine's connections, indicated led to a back staircase. The lock on the side door proved minimal challenge for Owen's skills, a remnant of his wartime experience. He explained tersely. They slipped inside, finding themselves in a narrow hallway that indeed contained a staircase leading to the second floor. Moving silently, weapons ready, they ascended. At the top, light spilled from beneath a door at the end of the corridor, Preston's office. They approached cautiously, listening for any indication that the banker wasn't alone. A voice drifted through the door, Preston apparently dictating notes to himself, a habit Penelope remembered from her father's dealings with him. The normalcy of it, this man calmly conducting business after destroying so many lives, sparked fresh anger in her chest. Owen caught her eye, silently asking if she was ready. Penelope nodded firmly. Without further hesitation, Owen threw the door open, entering with his revolver raised. Evening, Preston. The banker looked up in shock, his pen clattering to the desktop. He was a corpulent man in his 50s, expensively dressed, with cold eyes that quickly shifted from surprise to calculation. Rhodes, he identified Owen, recovering his composure with remarkable speed. And Miss Hayes, what an unexpected pleasure. Shut up, Penelope said, entering behind Owen with her own weapon trained on Preston. You've said enough to last a lifetime. Preston's gaze flicked between them, assessing. I assume this dramatic entrance has a purpose beyond rudeness. Justice, Owen replied simply. "For her father, for others you've ruined, for the men you sent to kill us." A thin smile stretched Preston's lips. Strong accusations from a man who's currently committing armed trespass. He leaned back in his chair with insulting nonchalance. "Whatever you believe I've done, Mr. Rhodes, this approach won't end well for you." "We're not here to debate," Penelope interrupted. "We're here for your records, the altered loan agreements, the evidence of your crimes." Something flickered in Preston's eyes, surprise, perhaps, that they knew exactly what they were looking for. "My files are private business matters." "Not anymore," Owen said, moving toward the large filing cabinet against one wall. "Penelope, keep him covered." As Owen began searching through the files, Preston's composure slipped slightly. "This is absurd. Even if you find something you think is incriminating, no one will believe the word of a woman whose father couldn't pay his debts and a rancher with a personal vendetta." "They'll believe documented evidence," Penelope replied. "Patterns of fraud across multiple loans, testimony from other victims." Preston's expression darkened. "You've been busy." "Very," Owen confirmed, extracting several folders from the cabinet. He quickly scanned their contents, his face grim with satisfaction. "These will do nicely." The banker's calculated calm finally cracked. With surprising speed for a man his size, Preston yanked open his desk drawer and grabbed a derringer hidden inside. "Put those down," he ordered, aiming the small but deadly weapon at Owen. "Now." Owen froze, evaluating the threat. Penelope kept her revolver steady on Preston, creating a deadly triangle in the room. "You won't shoot," she said, though uncertainty flickered through her. "Too many witnesses would hear." Preston's laugh held no humor. "My dear, this is my town, a shot fired in self-defense against intruders. I'd be lauded for my bravery." The standoff stretched for several tense seconds. Then, a slight sound from the doorway drew everyone's attention. Miller stood there, his rifle aimed squarely at Preston. "Evening, folks. Thought I heard raised voices." The momentary distraction was all Owen needed. He lunged forward, knocking Preston's arm upward as the derringer discharged, the bullet harmlessly embedding itself in the ceiling. In the next instant, Owen had the banker pinned to his desk, the man's weapon clattering to the floor. "It's over, Preston," Owen said, his voice deadly quiet. "Your schemes, your power, your hold over this town, all of it ends tonight." Fear finally registered in the banker's eyes, not of physical harm, but of exposure, of ruin. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice strained beneath Owen's grip. "Money. I can pay more than whatever you think those documents are worth." "We want justice," Penelope replied, stepping forward. "For my father, for everyone you've destroyed." Preston's gaze darted between them, desperate calculation visible in his expression. "Listen to reason. Those papers alone won't be enough." "I have friends in the territorial government, connections in—" "Not anymore," Miller interrupted, producing a folded document from inside his coat. "This arrived in Helena 2 days ago. Federal banking examiners are already investigating your operations." "These documents are just the final evidence they need." Preston's face drained of color. "That's impossible. I would have heard, not if your usual informants were persuaded to remain silent," Owen said coldly. "Money works both ways, Preston." The full magnitude of his situation finally seemed to register with the banker. His shoulders slumped, the fight draining from him. "What happens now?" he asked dully. "Now we leave with these documents," Owen replied, releasing his hold but keeping his weapon trained on Preston. "By morning, they'll be in the hands of federal authorities. After that, your fate is in the hands of the justice system you've corrupted for so long." Preston's expression hardened suddenly. "You think you've won? That you can just walk away to your ranch with Hayes's daughter and live happily ever after?" His laugh was bitter. "You're dead men walking, both of you." "My associates won't." The rest of his threat was cut off as Miller stepped forward, delivering a precise blow to Preston's temple that rendered the banker unconscious. "Man talks too much," the foreman observed dispassionately. They worked quickly after that, gathering the most damning documents, securing Preston with his own belt and handkerchief, and exiting the way they had come. Rodriguez was waiting in the alley, keeping watch for any sign of trouble. "All clear," he reported, "but we should move fast." They melted into the shadows of Silverdale, making their way back to the livery where their horses waited. Within minutes, they were riding out of town, the precious documents secured in Owen's saddlebags. "Federal Marshal will meet us at Willow Creek tomorrow," Miller informed them as they put distance between themselves and Silverdale. "From there, the law takes over." Penelope felt a complex mixture of emotions as they rode through the night, relief that their mission had succeeded, satisfaction at Preston's downfall, but also a strange emptiness. For so long, her life had been defined by escaping Preston's threat and seeking justice for her father. With that goal achieved, what remained? She glanced at Owen riding beside her, his profile strong in the moonlight. The answer, she realized, was beside her. What remained was the future they might build together, free from the shadows of the past. They made camp several hours later when the horses needed rest. As they sat beside a small fire, the tension of the confrontation gradually eased from their bodies. "It worked," Penelope said softly, still somewhat disbelieving. "We actually did it." Owen nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Justice through legal means. Better outcome than I expected." Miller, keeping watch nearby, grunted agreement. "Preston's finished. Once those documents reach the authorities, his empire collapses. And the bounty hunters?" Penelope asked. "The men he sent after us." "Hired guns go where the money is," Rodriguez observed. "When Preston can't pay, they'll find other employers." They discussed practical matters for a while longer, the meeting with the federal marshal, the likely timeline of Preston's prosecution, the security measures they would maintain until the banker was officially in custody. Eventually, Miller and Rodriguez moved to the perimeter of the camp to keep watch, leaving Owen and Penelope a measure of privacy by the fire. "How do you feel?" Owen asked, studying her face in the flickering light. Penelope considered the question carefully. "Relieved, satisfied." She paused, searching for the right words. "And strangely light, as if a weight I've carried so long I forgot it was there has suddenly lifted." Owen nodded, understanding. "Vengeance is a heavy burden, justice is lighter." "Is that how you felt after the railroad?" "Eventually," he admitted. "Took longer than it should have." Penelope reached for his hand, lacing her fingers with his. "And now, with Preston?" "Now I'm thinking about tomorrow," Owen replied, his gaze steady on hers, "and the day after, about possibilities." The simplicity of his answer touched her deeply. Owen Rhodes was not a man given to flowery declarations or grand promises. His honesty, his directness, these were the foundations of who he was, and what had drawn her to him from the beginning. "I'd like to see those wildflowers again," Penelope said softly, "when spring comes to your valley." Owen's expression softened with hope and something deeper. "Our valley," he corrected gently, "if that's what you want." "It is," Penelope confirmed, the certainty of her decision filling her with unexpected peace. "Not because I have nowhere else to go, not because you saved me." She held his gaze steadily. "Because I choose it, because I choose you." Owen drew her closer, his kiss conveying what words could not: gratitude, promise, and a devotion that had grown from the unlikeliest of beginnings. When they separated, Penelope smiled slightly. "I still don't want to be loved," she warned, remembering her fear of dependency, of loss. "Not in the way that breaks you when it's gone." Owen's expression held perfect understanding. "Then let me need you instead," he repeated softly. "Let us build something stronger than love. Something that endures." In that moment, beneath the vast Montana sky with danger behind them and possibility ahead, Penelope Hayes knew she had found not just safety or escape, but a true home in this land. And with this man who understood that sometimes the deepest connections form not from romantic notions, but from the recognition of shared strength and mutual necessity. The remaining pieces fell into place over the following weeks. Preston was taken into federal custody, his operations dismantled, his influence shattered. Other victims came forward with similar stories of manipulation and fraud, strengthening the case against him. The banker who had once ruled Silverdale with impunity found himself facing years in prison. Word spread throughout the territory that the Hayes debt had been fraudulent, that Thomas Hayes had died defending his property against illegal seizure. Penelope's name was cleared, her father's memory restored to honor. She wrote to her Aunt Catherine with the news, receiving a warm reply that included both congratulations and practical matters: the shipment of Penelope's few remaining possessions from Denver, advice on managing a household in remote territory, and thinly veiled inquiries about when a wedding might be expected. That question was answered on a clear autumn day when Penelope Hayes became Penelope Rhodes in a simple ceremony at the ranch. Miller served as witness, Catherine journeyed from Denver to attend, and the local preacher from Elkridge officiated. It was small, unadorned, and perfect in its sincerity. The seasons turned. Winter blanketed the valley in pristine white, spring brought the promised wildflowers in riotous abundance, summer filled the meadows with tall grass and the sound of cattle. Through it all, Penelope and Owen built their life together, expanding the cabin, improving the ranch operations, establishing themselves as respected members of the scattered community. They never spoke of love in conventional terms. Instead, they demonstrated it daily in practical ways, Owen teaching Penelope to manage the ranch books, Penelope creating a real home from what had been merely shelter, both of them working side by side through difficulties and celebrations alike. Sometimes at night, when the mountain silence wrapped around their cabin like a protective cloak, Owen would look at his wife with an expression that still held wonder at how their paths had crossed. "You ever regret it?" he asked once. "Choosing this life, this place?" Penelope considered the question honestly, as was their way together. "No," she finally answered. "It's not always easy, but it's ours. We built it together." She smiled slightly. "And the wildflowers were exactly as you described." Owen's laugh was soft in the darkness. "Worth coming all this way for?" "Worth everything," Penelope replied, resting her head against his shoulder. "Even the bounty hunters. Their life wasn't perfect. The territories remained wild, ranching remained challenging, and memories of past losses never completely faded. But they had built something neither had thought possible after their respective tragedies. A partnership founded not on desperate passion or fleeting romance, but on mutual respect, shared purpose, and the quiet certainty of being truly needed. And in the end, that proved stronger than any conventional notion of love could have been. It endured, as they had promised each other it would, through all the seasons of their lives together in the valley they both now called home.